Welcome to the module Building a Relationship at the Bedside using verbal and nonverbal encouragement. The two main objectives for this module are 1. Identify verbal facilitation skills and ways to offer encouragement to the patient at the bedside, and 2. Identify nonverbal facilitation skills and ways to implement them into the resident physician discussions with patients. As we step back and look at the big picture, the way in which residents and physicians communicate with patients at the bedside can either make or break that critical relationship surrounding patient care. This cartoon strip is a great example of why we need to work on facilitation skills. One doctor states, "What's wrong, James?" As he replies, "I just met my new patient. It didn't go well. I want to understand what she's going through, but I don't know where to start." Well, you don't want this scenario to happen. Therefore, it's important to actively encourage patients to continue to tell their story. Let's look at ways to start these conversations and keep the dialogue going. What are verbal facilitation skills? Verbal facilitation is the use of words, phrases, or statements used to keep the patient engaged in the communication and dialogue with the resident or physician. Additionally, facilitative response is any behavior that has the effect of inviting patients to say more about the area that they are already discussing. Let's look now at some examples of verbal facilitation. Take the time to really listen to the patient. Don't just nod your head in agreement. Keep the patient talking and use short statements. Use statements such as, "Go on, tell me more." An example of echoing is when the patient might say, "I just couldn't take a good breath." The resident or physician would respond by saying, "You felt as if you couldn't get your breath? Like you were suffocating? Is this correct?" You are truly echoing the patient's words through repetition. Clarification is simply having the patient clarify their thoughts. Well, what do you mean by dull? You could even have them provide an example for further clarity if needed. Confrontation is gently calling attention to links and/or inconsistencies in the patient's story. You are building awareness. Make sure to do this in a non-threatening manner while using professional word choice. Praise. This positively reinforces the patient's behaviors. Give the patient the kudos they need when warranted, especially if you want the patient to continue that specific behavior. Reflection. Recalling an earlier work or statement. Take the time to reflect back to a previous part of the conversation with the patient if it is going to help you with clarity in the discussion or topic. Here are a couple examples of verbal encouragement and the use of occasional social praises. "You've quit smoking. That's excellent. I bet it took some willpower on your part." Or, "I'm glad you're doing your breast self-exam every month. It's very important as most women detect lumps themselves." This goes a long way towards increasing the rapport and continued health care with the patient. There are benefits to the residents and physicians when this information is obtained directly from the patient. Why? Because it is in the patient's own words and not someone's assumptions or misrepresentation. It is an effective time management tool because when you keep the patient talking, fewer questions will arise. There are also benefits to the patients. When you have good facilitation skills, this provides the patients an opportunity to elaborate. It also allows the patient to use their own words, which builds autonomy and gives them the freedom to speak. It also helps the patient feel that the resident or physician are interested and invested in the responses of them. What are nonverbal facilitation skills? Nonverbal facilitation is defined as any form of communication that is not a word. Nonverbal facilitation occurs throughout the conversation and should always be present. People naturally hear with all of their senses and respond not only to words, but to gestures, facial expressions, posture, and vocal inflection. Nonverbal facilitation makes up about 2/3 of all communication in a conversation. Let's look at some examples of nonverbal facilitation skills. Appropriate eye contact means that the amount of eye contact that is comfortable for the patient, avoiding staring or conducting the conversation as if it were an interrogation. It is noted that different cultures have different rules for eye contact. For example, certain cultures can perceive direct eye contact as a way to signal competitiveness. Others lower their eyes to signal respect, and similarly, eye contact is avoided in some cultures between men and women. Therefore, it is incumbent on the resident or physician to identify what the patient preference is and adjust accordingly. Body language can say a lot about a person. Residents and physicians should lean forward in a listening posture when it's appropriate. If the resident or physician crosses his or her arms while the patient relates part of the history, it may suggest something about the resident or physician's opinion of the patient and his problem. Appropriate facial expressions means that the resident or physician is keeping with the tone of the conversation and patient situation. A resident or physician should also be aware of the limitations of physical barriers between himself and the patient. In this example, it is a table, but in the patient's room, it could be a computer cart, a chair, or even an actual person. Physical contact can be wonderful and very powerful at the bedside. For example, during the conversation, if a patient becomes upset, the resident or physician may want to show support by touching the patient in an appropriate non-threatening place, such as on the hand or the shoulder or even the upper back. One thing to consider is that physical contact can also be negative. For example, if there is a gender or age difference, the patient may perceive touching as inappropriate. Having an extra person in the room can offer you indirect support should physical contact be misinterpreted. Tone of voice is an important element because it provides another avenue for the resident or physician to convey interest and compassion for the patient. If used incorrectly, tone of voice may be interpreted negatively, such as being condescending, disinterested, or even sarcastic. Proxemics is sitting or standing at an appropriate distance to maximize patient comfort. It is important for the resident or physician to be aware of patient cues of comfort when it comes to body orientation and distance between the patient and the resident or physician. The belly button rule is one tool that may help residents or physicians convey nonverbal interest in the conversation. The belly button rule states that where a person's belly button is pointed is where others subconsciously perceive his attention is directed. For instance, if a resident or physician is facing the patient, but his belly button is pointed toward the keyboard, away from the patient, he may not be perceived as interested in the conversation, as if a resident or physician who is facing the patient with his belly button also pointed toward the patient. Some residents or physicians like to ensure accuracy by taking notes while speaking with the patient. If a resident or physician chooses to read a chart, write notes, or use a computer, the resident or physician should do it in a manner that does not interfere with eye contact, dialogue, or rapport. Patients may withhold their initial reply to a resident or physician's question until eye contact is given. Some may even pause when the resident or physician looks at the notes and resume when eye contact is regained. Residents and physicians may frequently miss or forget information offered while they are reading their notes. There are a few benefits to residents and physicians when using nonverbal facilitation skills. Use of nonverbal facilitation conveys interest in an ongoing connection. It also reinforces other avenues of communication techniques. The benefit to the patient is he or she feels validated as a person, which may in turn allow for them to provide additional pertinent information about their history or illness. In conclusion, there are many benefits of verbal and nonverbal facilitation skills when communicating with patients. Take the time to implement a few of these examples that you've seen today, if you don't already do them.